afternoon. It's a Wednesday afternoon that's incredibly beautiful in Wilmington, North Carolina. My name is Reverend Nickie Golden. This is Reverend Mindy Tucker, and we have with us an amazing individual, amazing human, as she would say. Her name is Carey Sipp. I will let her introduce herself and her job title because it is a mouthful.
I get to like Southeast region and I get lost.
Yeah, it's a big region too. I'm the Southeastern Regional Community Facilitator for a nonprofit organization called ACES Connection, which is the social network for the ACES science movement. ACES standing for Adverse Childhood Experiences, the root cause of almost all of our problems in the world.
It really is. We don't understand how trauma impacts us, and that's some of what we'll be talking about. But first, Reverend Mindy is going to do the daily word for us.
Well, it's perfect for healing from past trauma because any negative thought can set off trauma or a link back to trauma that we've had. Today's daily word is I'm grateful for my prosperity. Prosperity of health, prosperity of relationships, prosperity of financial means, prosperity of anything that we can source from God, which is everything. Prosperity is not so much about a shift in outer conditions, but a shift in awareness. And what an opening for healing that could be any time we find ourselves triggered in the present moment. We can have a shift, invite ourselves into a shift in consciousness to create a different experience of our circumstance. And isn't that what your work is all about?
Well, it is, and it is about right now at this moment an opportunity to think about the wealth that we have in people. And I have a friend who says he doesn't have money and he doesn't have property, but he is a people millionaire. He's rich in his relationships, and I would agree. I feel very wealthy in my relationships to have you all as friends and to have made as many friends in Wilmington as I have in such the short time that I've been here. But looking at that lesson and thinking about how we can take that out into the community and tying it back to adverse childhood experiences, which adverse childhood experiences can include domestic violence, growing up in addiction, growing up in a home where there's mental illness, where there is someone who's in prison, in a home where there is physical violence, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect. But those are the kind of the internal, in your own environment, adverse childhood experiences or toxic childhood stress. But out in the community, we call them the environmental ACEs, the community ACEs of racism, of violence, of poverty, of bullying. And right now, we in this time have a terrific opportunity in our own homes and eventually when we get back out into the community or even the small communities that we're in where we do see people, even online, to be an agent for change in looking to not let the negative past influence the right now, this moment. It's said that children's negative circumstances that create the toxic childhood stress can be buffered by one caring adult.
Mm-hmm.
And we really want to promote the idea of positive childhood experiences because having one person who makes a stand for you or is kind to you or shares something with you, and for children the needs to have stability, nurture, safety, and right now the threat of safety when they see their parents so concerned. And so this is a great time for people to resource some emotional strengths that are in all of us. This is a time for us to really look for our strengths and key on our strengths. When have we been strong? When have we seen people that we loved when were we nurtured? Who are, as Mr. Rogers says, who are the helpers?
Mm-hmm.
We've all got helpers. So,
Well, I love your keyword resource,
mhm.
because when we break apart that word resource, we're making that shift in consciousness to source our good, our comfort, our love, our safety from someone or a model of someone in our lives. For a lot of people, it was like home wasn't the happy place, but the presence of a grandmother made all the difference, or a special uncle or a special aunt made all the difference. Like my Aunt Betty, it was unconditional love. No matter what my mom did, and I'm not saying my mom was bad, but I resourced my safety, my love, my dependency. She was like my God personified, because she was the one who would always believe in me.
Right. And for many people, and this is an interesting time, but there is a teacher who was that person.
Yeah.
You know, I had a 4th grade teacher who believed in me, and she is a resource for me. So for children who now are at home, and school was their safe place, and home is not a safe place, how much I wish we could get this message to them. And here in Wilmington, we're very lucky that one of the programs that teaches this is called the Community Resiliency Model, that was created by a woman who, in fact, has taken it to 39 countries all over the world.
She's from Wilmington, or this is the one who brought it to Wilmington?
She created it. She's in California, but there are, this is amazing, Wilmington has a very large community of people who have been through some aspect of this training. There are more than 1,000 people, thanks to Wilmington's incredible Community Resiliency Task Force, that y'all know Mevin Boyd,
I do.
and many community leaders. There are more than 700 members of that Resiliency Task Force here in Wilmington. That's what I work to do, is to help task forces such as that get started in 11 states throughout the Southeast. But these people have been working to help schools become trauma-informed. Trauma-informed meaning that we look at a person and we look at their strengths,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of when they don't comply with something, we don't say, "What's wrong with you? Why
Right,
did
a
you do
deficiency,
that?"
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We say, "What happened and how can I help?" Because, you know, everything is a cry for love.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a cry for love. So when a parent acts out, or a child acts out, or there's a crossword, it's usually in that somebody wants something that they're not getting at that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And if we could see it as attention, seeking love, as opposed to being disruptive,
Mm-hmm.
what a difference that could make for us as we, relate to significant others, as we relate to our children, just to increase that peace, that poise, and that inner
Mm-hmm.
strength that comes from not letting anything outside of us, which is very difficult right now,
Mm-hmm.
activate or trigger us.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult right now. I mean, I think we're being called to truly be the best version of ourselves, and I'm so grateful that in this community there's so many people who know this. And talking about resourcing, going back to the source, that is one of the tools of that community resiliency model, is to have people think back to a moment in their lives when they felt safe, when they
Mm-hmm.
felt secure, when they felt loved. And I go back to a night of camping with my son and my daughter-in-law and her little sister, and how safe I felt in that tent, and how grateful I felt, off the beaten path in the mountains of Montana with these 3 amazing people, and moments with my daughter when she would come up behind me and, give me a big hug.
Mm-hmm.
So if people can remember those moments with a grandmother or a teacher or a loved one, or
Mhm.
your Aunt Betty, who's your person?
My person was my grandmother. I was very close to her growing up, and she lived 60 miles away, but she came to where my mom and dad and my brothers and I lived. And she came down about once a week. She would bring food, she would spend the night, and I walked home from school. I lived in a kind of community that it was very easy to do so, and I'd walk through a couple of backyards, a couple of neighborhoods, and come around the corner of our house and see her car in the driveway, and my body was like, yes, I would just perk up. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience.
I'm looking at noticing the body language, and so when Carey, you were talking about resourcing, you were talking about remember that time, but you kept putting your hand over your heart, and I think that's part of what heart math teaches is, do the heart lock in, but remember that time you were safe and loved, and then to be so excited, you can scoop it all in and put it in here in your heart, resource it, and then when you're reframed, you just explode in that joy.
Yes.
And the brain science of that is amazing, because part of the reason that we are so about preventing adverse childhood experiences is that for children who grow up in adversity, the structure and the function of the developing brain are changed by the neurochemicals, by the chemicals, the hormones that the body produces when we're under toxic stress. And now as adults, it's not as bad, but when you're an itty bitty in utero fetus or a week-old baby, or up until you're 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, or really truly the brain does not stop developing until you're in your mid-20s. Well, that toxic bath of chemicals, of cortisol and adrenaline, it's absolutely poison for the developing brain, in that it helps us wire away from the emotionally sound parts of our brain, but it makes the limbic system of the brain, especially the amygdala, which is where emotions are in our limbic brain, we become hyper alert. And so little kids who grow up in poverty and trauma and violence oftentimes are looked at as having attention deficit disorder or some type of learning disability, when in fact their brains are wired to constantly be on the lookout for the next gunshot or the next backhand or the next time they can grab a bite of food. And we punish people for their biology, which is, I pray in 1,000 ways in this time that it is the massive reset of our collective central nervous system in this United States, in the world, to reset, to get back to a place of safety and comfort and nurture, and to allow this pressure that we have put on ourselves to reset. I mean, especially, we talk about a lot and post many articles on ACES Connection about the disparity between the deaths of African American and of brown people and white people. Black and brown people have known an inordinate amount of stress, and it is carried generation to generation forward genetically. And so this time is especially traumatizing for people who are living in close quarters, who don't have access to healthy food, who, think about the people in Flint, Michigan, for example, who have known that their water system is poisoned for years. And the fact that excuse me, but if we're not told the truth about the situation, or if there are many different stories flying around, having one's reality denied is an epic adverse experience.
It is.
Whether you're a child or an adult, but for people whose reality was denied when they were children, oh, it's fine. Oh, well, just go you know, put on a nice dress, it'll be okay. Go wash your face, it'll be okay.
Without a lot of resources or an ability to say, it's not fine for me. It might be fine for you, but it's not fine for me. And so when we can be safe enough in a place to say, it's not fine for me, and to be heard by somebody else, that assists us in building trust. And it can be such a simple statement of, I hear it's not fine for you. Tell me more about what you're feeling, or share more with me about what you're feeling, so that the person has an opportunity to speak what's happening and to be heard and not dismissed. Because what I hear you saying, Carey, is people dismiss us. Oh, that's not my reality, so it could not be your reality. But we need to be able to look at each other and listen to what the reality for each of us is, which builds trust and builds a sense of safety.
It does, and that is something on ACES Connection, which I invite your members, the viewers, to visit acesconnection.com. There is a wealth of information about caring for yourself during a time such as this. There is a whole widget that is ACES in Education to help parents who are educating their children at home, which is traumatizing for the parents and the children. There is Parenting with ACES in a Pandemic, which is a tremendous resource for people who grew up with adverse childhood experiences, many people who grew up with adverse childhood experiences, I'm included, were afraid to parent because we were afraid we would do what our parents did or worse, and there are many resources there to help parents. There are videos and webinars, and we've been in fact doing a whole series of webinars called A Better Normal, because when this does settle down, we don't want to go back to the old way. It was not sustainable. People were exhausted. I say toasted, roasted, fried, and roasted. But, you know, the earth could not sustain it, and humanity could not sustain it. And so instead of a new normal, we said we want a better normal. What does a better normal look like? And a better normal is trauma informed, meaning we look at each other with compassion, and we look at each other with generosity and acceptance, as opposed to blame, shame, guilt, fear, greed, because we've been slowed down, and this is an opportunity for individuals. I'm doing a lot of resetting, for families to reset, for companies to reset, and for, you know, I say we're not going to get a regulated congressional response from people who are dysregulated, and how we re-regulate the nervous system. And that's what I love about that community resiliency model, because it's about resourcing, it's about tracking your body and where we are in our bodies. It's about looking around and how many of our senses can we engage to, what does this chair feel like? Do I see a color blue? Is there a smell? So that we can get back in our bodies, and as opposed to many people with trauma disassociate, you know, or just bury themselves, deny their reality as well. So,
well, that's what we've been taught to do.
Yeah.
You're not really angry, you're not really scared, you're not really hurt.
Or just get over it. That's the other thing people will often say, just get over it. Or how many of you heard, just go to your room, I don't want to hear it. Or if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about.
When the truth of the matter is, if we would just take, and now we have it, the extra 15 minutes to comfort a child in that moment, and to find out, where is the fear really coming from? What is the hurt? You know, there's always something underneath that if we just listen a little more and ask a little more, say more about that. You know, Nickie, who's a therapist, you know, she's the queen of, say more about that,
Tell me
please.
more. And
we're getting to that, yes.
yeah. And then there's little things we can do. I was in Publix the other day, and I was unaware that the aisles now have directions for them, and I had this spur of the moment idea in my head. It's like, oh, I want to get this, and I knew it was in the aisle, and I didn't realize that they had one ways, and I zipped down the aisle the wrong way, and a woman very kindly said to me, I think that they want you to go a specific way and you're going the wrong way. She could have been really rude about it, but she was very kind about it. I said, oh, I didn't know. Thank you for letting me know. So we had this beautiful moment, well, for me, of connection, and I recognized her kindness, that she could have been very rude about it, but she was very kind about it. So we have an opportunity that when we see something like me coming down the aisle the wrong way, that the other person who's observing, or I who might be observing something, could just share that with an even tone of voice, with kindness in our hearts. Because if we're thinking kindness in our hearts, we're going to speak differently. So there are a lot of little things that we can do. So.
About being grounded and centered.
Yes.
And coming out of that heart space, as opposed to, where we were called, it seems to come out of when we were rushing and trying to get to work and trying to sling things in a grocery basket as quickly as we can, and then get home and get people fed and get them to bed so we could get to bed. And now that we can ease off that rush, because rushing is abusive.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It's very abusive. It jacks up cortisol, it gets adrenaline going, and truly, I believe that many people in our country have been addicted, I was, to our own adrenaline and our own
it
cortisol.
is the number one addiction in our country.
Well, and it goes so hand in hand with sugar, because they all feed into each other.
Yeah.
That we feel a little relief from something that we ingest. And in fact, I was having a great conversation with an addiction therapist this morning about and another one on the way over, about the tie between trauma and addiction, and how much trauma sets people up for addiction. And now that so many people can't indulge a primary addiction, which shopping is an incredible addiction. Getting the buy high,
Mm-hmm.
or going out and sitting in a bar drinking, can't do that. But we've got to be so careful, because addictions live in secrecy, in the dark, and in isolation. And so in this time when so many people are isolated, are alone, it's a good time to remember we can be an Aunt Betty or a grandmother or a teacher electronically.
Yes.
Need be, to make a call and reach out and touch someone.
Yeah.
That way.
Or a text.
Yeah.
Or an email. Or an e-card. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. Even a beautiful comment on Facebook. Our board president put, in case you haven't heard today, I love you. Something to that, I'm paraphrasing it. But she put a meme like that on her Facebook page, and by the end of the day, she had a whole lot of people saying back, and I love you too.
Isn't that sweet?
It is, it's very sweet, and it's just a moment of connection. But those moments of connection lead to a day that has had a bunch of moments of connection within it.
Right, because in the human brain, synapses that fire together wire together. And so if we can help, I send people pictures of us doing something fun together, or of themselves doing something fun together, because a picture holds so much emotion and can spark emotion, and a thought is truly chemical. It's a chemical reaction in our brains, and the more we can create those pleasant thoughts and those pleasant memories, the greater the likelihood that more and more and more of those will follow. And just as you say, that's why it's so important to start the day well, and to during these times, they say, to have some structure and have a schedule. Make sure when we talk about resilience, and here in New Hanover, the New Hanover Resiliency Task Force, we're talking about individuals becoming more resilient, families becoming more resilient, the community becoming more resilient as a collective, and that comes from self-care of the getting enough rest and the eating as much good food as we can, and remembering to drink enough water, and remembering to have some fun.
Yes.
One thing I am loving in this conversation is the repeating pattern of
Yes.
So resource, repeat, redirect, reconnect,
Resilience.
remember. It's just a kind of day.
Yeah, it is.
Respect.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But when we get stuck or lost in that nanosecond, we can reset our consciousness. We can choose to uplift and rejoin a resilience consciousness that's shifting this community. We can rejoin a consciousness that is shifting the culture in the United States and shifting the way we think about our world. So rethinking how we want to be. What is our new normal?
Or better normal.
Or better
Yes,
normal.
better
As we reconnect
Yeah.
toward that, the resources, there's even another program that's similar to the community resilience model called Reconnect for Resilience, Resources for Resilience, I think is what it's called, and very much the same type model of people within the community learning these skills and then sharing them with each other, as opposed to there being some, teacher that you have to go to that source
Oh yeah.
to get it, but that we regroup.
Haha.
Another way, I'm looking for them with you, I'm on it with you, but that we regroup together to learn these skills so that we can remind each other of them. And even, looking at a picture, to find some resource in your environment, even if it's touching wood, to ground,
Yes.
to center, even drinking a cool sip of water to rehydrate. We can ride this pony.
And another thing we can do is when we close our eyes, we actually reduce the stimulation from our environment by 95%. So simply closing our eyes and remembering to breathe will reduce stimulation, and when we do it for a period of time, it brings us out of that high beta brainwave pattern that occurs when cortisol is moving through our body, when it's dumping into a low beta toward alpha kinds of state, because it goes from beta to alpha, and it has a few more things, but all we have to do is close our eyes, because the moment we've closed our eyes, we have reduced the stimulus from outside by 95%, and then breathe, which helps us to center.
Spiritual practice.
Very easy spiritual practice to do. It's just about remembering to do it, or having somebody else reflect it back to us when they're feeling something that feels overwhelming in a moment. So.
And reflecting is hugely important, because we could talk about that with people who are stuck at home with their children, about modeling, and I would even say remodeling, because this is such a groundbreaking opportunity for parents to model a new behavior. It might be hard for them to get to it, but these behaviors come from self-care, from remembering to refresh ourselves in this time. I mean, we're called constantly, biblically, to refresh and renew, to take the Sabbath, to take time. And when I was growing up, we truly had the Sabbath. Nothing was open. Nobody did it. It was the day to reunion, to go to my grandparents and have a reunion under the pecan trees after church, and have a nice big lunch, and to truly relax, even though I'm not so sure the women all got to relax that much, because they were cooking and
they were in charge.
They were in charge, but yet that was something that brought them such joy to see their children, you know, playing underneath those trees, that was a grounding source for them,
Yes.
and made all of that work of them, you know, skinning chickens and plucking chickens and frying chickens and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with that.
Yeah, but
Skinning fish.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
The Honolulu, the Hawaii
The
connection.
Hawaii
but,
connection.
but still, the nurture and the
Yes.
feeding
Yes.
of each other for the repast.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
on a Sunday.
We've had fun with that one.
We've
Yeah,
had fun with
I've had
that
fun
one.
with that one.
But we've had fun with you.
Yes,
Oh, and
indeed.
I can't tell
Thank
you,
you.
to reconnect with the two of you after so many weeks of not seeing you has really been
Mm-hmm.
tremendously refreshing.
Yes, delightful.
Resource.
Yes, we will put the ACES website in the comments. If you've been touched, moved, or inspired by anything, if you have any questions, please feel free to put your comments. We will come back and we will answer them. We wish you good health, and we wish you the remembrance of who and what you are, that you are already whole, and that's what we are learning how to remember here, is our own wholeness, our own divinity.
And that's what Radiant Health is all about.
Indeed.
So thank you, Carey Sipp.
Oh,
Thank you, Reverend Nickie.
Thank you,
Reverend Mindy.
Thank you, Reverend.
And thank
And
you
thank you
guys.
for watching.